PlayStation 2 is home to some of the best racing games of all time, and also Butt Ugly Martians, Zoom or Doom. But with one T, the wonderful thing about the console is just how eclectic it truly is. If you just want to sit in a Ford Focus and go around the same corner 16 times, that's great. You can do that on the PS2, but also there's plenty of games for the Freakazoids too. Let's drive some emotion, whatever the hell that means, and take a look back on the best PS2 racing games of all time, starting with quite the adventure. Number 10, Road Trip Adventure. Okay, this one's absolutely, undeniably, the dedicated hipster's pick in this episode, but let me just say, Japanese open world racing RPG, and hope that piques your interest. And it should, because you've got a pulse. Road Trip Adventure is kinda like a precursor to a lot of modern day racing games. It came way before Forza Horizon and also has the world of Pixar's Cars beat when it comes to anthropomorphic vehicles, so it's quite the trailblazer. Known as Chorokyu HG2 in Japan or Everywhere Road Trip in North America, Road Trip Adventure utilised an open-ended career and fully explore a world in a time where open world games were still finding their feet. In a world of living cars, the president of that entire world decides he's bored of the job and wants to hold a massive Grand Prix to decide the next ruler of the free world. That is democracy manifest. As a humble car from the middle of nowhere, you'll work your way up the rankings, gaining sponsorships and teammates while competing in various races and minigames in order to qualify for the ultimate race. It's kind of like Ready Player One, actually. Road Trip Adventure might be a more obscure pick, and the actual racing and visuals aren't massively refined, but it's something a bit different that deserves its place among the best PS2 racing games of all time, just for really typifying an era of weird, brilliant experimentation. Also, I didn't want to put the next series and V-Rally in a racing video next to each other again, not gonna lie, but can you rally blame me? Number 9, Colin McRae Rally 2005. For pretty much the entire duration of the 2000s, one man almost had the entire rally game genre in a tighter hold than Xenia on the top in Heat. It was, of course, Colin McRae, the real-life rally driver who tragically died in a helicopter accident back in 2007. Colin McRae's licensed games with Codemasters were arguably the premier simulations of rally racing on the PS2. If it didn't have Colin McRae's name on the books, it probably wasn't a rally game worth playing. Respect Shocks though. All my homies loved Shocks. And obviously V-Rally. While there are several Colin McRae titles on the PS2, I'm going to give it a nod to Colin McRae Rally 2005, which made a raft of improvements to the overall gameplay and engine of the series, making it the culmination of years of incremental and sometimes massive improvements. Over 20 years on, Colin McRae Rally 2005 still looks and plays great, with really good damage physics and weather effects. Even had a popular online multiplayer presence back in the day. That being said though, pretty much all of the Colin McRae Rally PS2 titles are some of the best of their kind, so if you want to swap in any of them here, I'm not going to complain. Or if you want to put in V-Rally or Richard Burns Rally instead, that's also cool. I will draw the line at Ants Extreme Racing though, even Cillian Murphy can't save that one. Number 8, Ridge Racer 5. For years, the Ridge Racer series had the run of things over on PlayStation consoles, with the first 4 games in the series garnering critical acclaim and plenty of deserved attention, Heading into the PS2 era, eyes were on Namco to deliver a game that matched up to the franchise's lofty heights, and as a launch title for the PS2, it certainly achieved a lot of success and kinda showed what the console was capable of. You barely ever saw graphics like this back in 2000, and the generally pretty tight gameplay helped to give it an almost timeless quality. There's something wonderfully transportative about booting Ridge Racer 5 up today, as it'll take you right back to the PS2's launch right from its main menu, and also a time before you knew a bit too much about Typhlosion. Gosh. But the actual racing here also holds up really well too. Ridge Racer games have often been some of the most famous examples of drifting within gaming, with RR5 encouraging the player to power slide around corners at all times in order to win. Yeah, the game might be a bit bare bones in terms of content, but the gameplay and soundtrack that Ridge Racer 5 offers are still compelling even to this day. Now, if Bandai Namco could make a new one, that'd be bloody lovely. Cheers. It's quite sad that neither the PS4 or PS5 have seen a new Ridge Racer game. Guess the series went really downhill. Number 7, Downhill Domination. Given that Santa Monica Studio earned so much acclaim in 2018 with God of War, a game about climbing up a mountain, it makes sense that one of the earlier games they helped develop was Downhill Domination, a BMX racing game about going down a mountain really fast. Although there's no Spartans or Norse gods roaming around in Downhill Domination, there are plenty of crashes that even the most hardened of gods would struggle to walk away from. As the name might suggest, Downhill Domination is all about racing as fast as possible, competing against not only other players but the very environment itself. It's not the deepest game ever, but it doesn't have to be. With both first-person and third-person perspectives, Downhill Domination could be considered way ahead of its time now that games like Descenders and Riders Republic are being enjoyed by thousands of people. And hey, there was also Motorstorm that kept a lot of the PS2 spirit alive on PS3, and there was even Onrush. Anybody Onrush? Oh man, I liked Onrush, okay? If you want to see where some of that DNA comes from, you really have to check Downhill Domination out, then check out Shane McMahon's favourite game afterwards. Number 6, Outrun 2006, Coast to Coast. Normally, a racing game series can struggle to keep itself going as it gets older, but Outrun managed to successfully reinvent itself brilliantly for the 6th generation of consoles with Outrun 2 for arcades and later the OG Xbox. Transitioning from 2D to 3D turned out to be a great move for the series, but Sega weren't done there, tasking the British studio Sumo Digital with creating the infinitely better Outrun 2006 Coast to Coast, which still stands as one of the most immediately pick up and play racing games, well, ever. The core gameplay of Outrun remains the same, with the player trying to make their way through various stages as quickly as possible, drifting around corners in a Ferrari to do so. However, Coast to Coast earns its acclaim for the amount of additional content it jams in, with a full arcade conversion of Outrun 2 SP included, along with an extensive career mode and more cars than any other Outrun game. Unfortunately though, the licensing deal between Sega and Ferrari collapsed in 2010, so chances of a new game in the series remain pretty slim, but it could be exactly what the world needs. Number 5, SSX3. Man, they don't make games like Downhill Domination and SSX anymore, do they? Well, as mentioned, Riders Republic is kinda like Downhill Domination, and there is an SSX spiritual successor called Tricky Madness in early access that's shaping up pretty well, but they're just not quite the same. While we are pretty big fans of Tricky here at CVHQ, SSX3 probably has to be recognised as the best in the series, just for its absolutely bonkers scale. A snowboard racing game with tons of ridiculous gravity-defying tricks to pull off, the incredible thing about SSX3 is that you can board from the top of the mountain all the way to the bottom. Yep, SSX3 lets you play all sorts of different races consecutively as you board down the mountain, all on the PlayStation 2. It's even possible to maintain a combo down the entirety of the gigantic mountain, which is still nuts today. Add in some wild weather effects, overall beautiful visuals, one of the best soundtracks ever, and the ability to play as Bigfoot, and you have an absolute whipper of a game. The fact that so few snowboarding games have even been released in the past 10-15 years is the biggest compliment you can give SSX as a whole. How do you ever top the series? Even all these years on, I have a need for a new game, and a need for... segue. Number 4, Need for Speed Underground 2. Listen, you simply had to be there when NFS Underground 1 opened up with Get Low blaring out of the main menu. To the window and lo, the wall beckons, and then just a year later, an even better sequel came out. Another racing game series that's synonymous with the PS2, Need for Speed made its name on games like Hot Pursuit and Most Wanted, but for many the series peaked with the Underground duology. Need for Speed Underground brought street racing customization and that iconic grimy tribal tattooey aesthetic to the franchise, but for our money Underground 2 built on everything the prior game introduced and made it so much better. Taking the action away from just enclosed tracks to allow players to explore a full city, Underground 2 follows the same premise as most racing games. You win events, you upgrade your gear, you take on tougher events, and so on until you eventually claim the entirety of Bayview as your own. With excellent arcade-esque racing that can still be quite challenging, some still rather brilliant graphics, plenty of race types and loads of cars to choose from, but you'll just go to the Nissan Skyline anyway, it's no wonder that NFS Underground 2 became as successful as it did. But it doesn't get the dub here. Number 3, Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition Remix. Yes, it might be a somewhat controversial opinion to say that Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition Remix is a better underground racing game than Need for Speed Underground 2, but when comparing the two side by side, Midnight Club 3 just about edges it. If open world street racing is your bag, Midnight Club 3 is the best of the best on PS2. Across 3 different cities, you'll prove yourself as the best street racer in San Diego, Atlanta, and Detroit, earning and customizing cars along the way. Each map is filled with shortcuts and secrets to unlock, rewarding heavy exploration on top of just racing, while the physics nicely blur the line between simulation and arcade-esque drifting. As a sweet little bonus, the remix version also includes more cars, tracks, songs, and a 4th city in the form of Midnight Club 2's Tokyo map. It's also a harder game than Need for Speed, with AI that will consistently challenge you throughout the game's career mode, and while there's no sweat dripping down balls in this game's soundtrack, it does boast Sean Paul. Need I say more? Okay, Midnight Club also has bikes. Take that, Need for Speed. Next up, the series that died so we could keep on getting some pretty mid Need for Speed games. Number 2, Burnout 3 Takedown. Not a day goes by that we don't lament the fact that EA and Criterion stopped making Burnout games. While the series might have struggled to find its footing with Burnout 1 and Burnout 2 Point of Impact, Criterion proved 3rd time's the charm with Burnout 3 Takedown. If you like your racing games to be brash, eye-scorchingly fast, and filled with devastating crashes, Burnout 3 Takedown is absolutely the game for you, my fellow sicko. Light on premise but big on fun, you're competing to become the best Burnout racer of all time, travelling across the globe to slam, shunt, shove, and shit-can your opponents in a variety of events. Of course, if the racing isn't your speed or you're just feeling like a change, you can always launch into the crash mode instead, which tasks you with driving into a busy intersection to cause as much damage as possible. While Revenge was certainly no slouch either, PS2 racers rarely managed to be as enjoyable or entertaining as Burnout 3 Takedown, and really just the series as a whole is sorely missed. But you already know what number 1 is here, don't you? And number 1, Butt Ugly, now obviously Gran Turismo 4. Polyphony have been dominating the PlayStation racing game scene for decades with the Gran Turismo series, and it's not surprising when you have genre benchmarks like this one. When it comes to simulation racing, there aren't many better than Gran Turismo, especially if you absolutely love the smell of petrol in the morning and also retaking your driving test dozens of times. As far as the PS2 games are concerned, many would likely favour Gran Turismo 3 just for pure nostalgia's sake, as that blew some minds when it first came out, but Gran Turismo 4 is head and shoulders above it, and well, basically every other racing game on the PS2. This is an incredible love letter to automotive culture without beating it over your head as much as it does in Gran Turismo 7. The whole game is just about building your car collection by winning Grand Prix events, completing missions and earning licenses. There's almost a whimsical nature to the whole affair too, especially as you can just sack off the racing and go take pictures of your cars in Times Square. As both simulation and just general racing games go, this is undoubtedly the PS2's crown jewel, and a high point that the series has kinda not always been able to even get near. Outro gang, couple of quick questions for you today. 1. Which kind of obscure, kind of forgotten racing game would you recommend for the PS2? Here's my recommendation. Come in. XG3 Extreme Racing, this was mind-blowing back in the day. This was so fast, it was like F-Zero on bikes. Ooh. Second question, would you like to watch me, instead of blathering in these outros, would you like to watch me play some PS2 games on my Bart Simpson's telly instead? And we can have a nice little hangout that way. What do you reckon? I've been Jamie for Culture Vultures. It's been good to have you, and thanks for watching. Vroom.